I sat alone in my old bedroom at my mother's house, holding a book I could not focus on. Downstairs, laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. My brother Derek's engagement party was in full swing, and everyone seemed to be having the time of their lives. Everyone except me. Through the thin walls I heard my mother's voice rise above the chatter, clear as a bell. She was telling the guests about her disappointment of a son who plays with books like a child. I smiled quietly to myself. But what my mother did not know was that those books she mocked had made me a millionaire. Before I share what happened next, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. And if stories about unexpected moments of truth resonate with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Stay with me because what happened next at that engagement dinner changed everything my family believed about success and failure. To understand why that night meant so much, I need to take you back to where it all began. I grew up in a modest house in suburban Ohio, the younger of two sons. My father, Frank, worked as an accountant for a manufacturing company, and my mother, Linda, was a secretary at a real estate office. They were practical people who believed in practical things. A good education, a stable career, a house with a white picket fence. That was the American dream they chased, and they expected their sons to chase it too. My older brother Derek fit perfectly into their vision. He was 3 years ahead of me, and from the moment I could form memories, I remember him being praised. Derek was the star of his Little League team. Derek made the honor roll. Derek was elected class president. He was tall, confident, and charming. Everything my parents wanted in a son. I was different. While Derek was out throwing footballs with the neighborhood kids, I was curled up in the corner of the public library, lost in worlds that existed only on paper. Books were my escape, my comfort, my best friends. I devoured everything I could get my hands on. Adventure novels, mystery stories, classic literature, science fiction. The library became my second home, and the librarian, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, became something like a grandmother to me. My mother never understood this. She would find me reading in my room and sigh heavily, shaking her head as if I were doing something wrong. "Why can you not go outside like your brother?" she would ask. "Why do you waste your time on those silly stories?" When I was 10 years old, the comparisons began in earnest. Derek had just won a regional spelling bee, and at the celebration dinner my mother announced to the whole family how proud she was of her golden child. Then she looked at me and said, "Maybe someday Arden will find something he is good at too." I remember the sting of those words, the way they settled into my chest like a splinter that never quite came out. By the time I was 12, I had started writing my own stories. I filled notebook after notebook with tales of heroes and villains, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. One afternoon, bursting with pride, I showed my mother a short story I had spent weeks perfecting. It was about a boy who discovered he could talk to animals and used his gift to save his town from a flood. She barely glanced at it. "Stop wasting time on this nonsense," she said without looking up from the television. "Look at your brother. He is already preparing for his future. You should be studying, not scribbling fairy tales." I took that notebook back to my room and buried it in the bottom of my closet. I never showed her my writing again. Throughout high school, the pattern continued. Derek excelled at everything he touched. He was captain of the debate team, president of the student council, and graduated as valedictorian. He got a full scholarship to an Ivy League university and later attended one of the best law schools in the country. My mother could not stop talking about him. And me, I got decent grades, stayed out of trouble, and spent every spare moment either reading or writing. I joined the school literary magazine where I published short stories under a pen name. A few teachers recognized my talent and encouraged me, but their voices were drowned out by the constant refrain at home. "Why can you not be more like Derek?" After graduating from a state university with a degree in English literature, I took a job at the local public library. The pay was modest, barely enough to cover rent on a small apartment, but I loved it. I was surrounded by books all day, helping people discover stories that might change their lives the way stories had changed mine. My mother was mortified. "A librarian," she said when I told her about the job. "My son is a librarian." She said the word like it tasted bitter on her tongue. "Derek just got promoted to associate at his law firm, and you are shelving books for minimum wage." What she did not know was that by then, I had already completed my first novel. I had spent 3 years writing it in the evenings after work, pouring everything I had into those pages. It was a literary thriller about a man who uncovers a conspiracy in his small town, and I believed in it with every fiber of my being. When a major publishing house accepted my manuscript, I faced a decision. They wanted to promote me, to put my face on book covers and send me on tours. But something held me back. I thought about my mother, about how she had dismissed my writing my entire life. I thought about how she would suddenly change her tune if she knew I was successful. And I realized I did not want her approval to come with a price tag. So I chose a pen name. J. D. Holloway. A name that meant nothing to anyone but me. My first book was published when I was 26 years old. It debuted at number 3 on the bestseller list and stayed in the top 10 for 32 weeks. Critics called it a masterpiece of modern suspense. Readers sent me letters saying it changed their lives. Within a year, I had sold over 2 million copies worldwide. I kept writing. My second novel came out 2 years later and did even better than the first. Then a third and a fourth. By the time I was 32, J. D. Holloway had sold over 10 million books, been translated into 30 languages, and had 2 novels optioned for major Hollywood films. I had earned more money than I knew what to do with. And through it all, I kept my secret. I continued working at the library part-time, not because I needed the money, but because I loved it. I lived simply, drove a used car, wore ordinary clothes. To my family, I was still Arden, the disappointment, the failure who never amounted to anything. Sometimes I wondered if I was being petty, keeping this from them. But every time I considered telling them, I remembered my mother's face when I showed her that short story at 12 years old. I remembered every comparison to Derek, every sigh of disappointment, every shake of her head. And I told myself, if they cannot love me as I am, they do not deserve to love me for what I have achieved. The engagement party for Derek and his fiancée, Megan, was held at my mother's house on a warm Saturday evening in September. The house was decorated with white streamers and silver balloons. A catering company had set up a buffet in the dining room, and a hired bartender was mixing drinks in the corner. My mother had spared no expense for her golden child. I arrived alone as always. I was wearing a simple blue button-down shirt and khaki pants, nothing fancy. In my jacket pocket I had tucked a paperback book I was in the middle of reading. Old habits die hard. My mother greeted me at the door with a strained smile. She looked me up and down, and I could see the familiar disappointment in her eyes. "You could have dressed up a little," she said. "This is your brother's special night." I apologized and stepped inside. The house was already full of relatives and friends, all there to celebrate Derek's upcoming wedding. I spotted my father, Frank, by the fireplace nursing a glass of whiskey. He gave me a small nod but did not come over to talk. That was typical. My father had never been cruel to me, but he had never defended me either. His silence was its own kind of wound. I found a quiet corner and observed the festivities. Derek was in the center of the room, charming everyone with his easy smile and confident manner. Beside him was Megan, his fiancée. She was a striking woman with auburn hair and intelligent green eyes. I had met her only twice before, and she had struck me as thoughtful and kind. As I watched, my mother called for everyone's attention. She stood in the middle of the living room, a glass of champagne in her hand, beaming with pride. "I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate my son Derek and his beautiful fiancée Megan," she began. Her voice carried that particular tone she reserved for showing off. "Derek, you have made me so proud. You have worked so hard to become the man you are today. A successful lawyer, a homeowner, and now you are marrying this wonderful woman. I could not be happier." She paused, and I felt my stomach tighten. I knew what was coming. "I wish I could say the same about all my children," she continued, glancing in my direction. "But we cannot all be winners, can we? Some of us are content to work in libraries and play with books like children who never grew up." A few people chuckled nervously. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, shook her head and clucked her tongue. I had heard her gossiping about me countless times at family gatherings. "Maybe one day Arden will find a real job," Aunt Patricia said, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Or at least find a wife who can support him." More laughter. I felt my face grow hot, but I kept my expression neutral. I had learned long ago that reacting only made things worse. Derek did not defend me. He just smiled awkwardly and said, "Come on, Mom, let us keep the focus on the party." But my mother was not finished. She turned to Megan and said, "I hope you understand what you are getting into, dear. This family has its share of success, but we also have our disappointments." She gestured toward me without even looking my way. I excused myself and stepped outside to the backyard. The cool evening air was a relief after the suffocating atmosphere inside. I pulled out my book and tried to read, but the words blurred before my eyes. A few minutes later, I heard the back door open. I looked up to see Megan approaching 2 glasses of wine in her hands. "I thought you could use this," she said, offering me one. I took it gratefully. "Thank you." She sat down on the porch step beside me. "I am sorry about what happened in there. That was not right." I shrugged. "I am used to it. That does not make it okay." She looked at me with genuine concern. "I noticed you brought a book." "What are you reading?" I showed her the cover. It was a literary novel by an author I admired. "Oh, I love her work," Megan said, her eyes lighting up. "I work in publishing, actually. I am an editor at a major house in New York." "Really, that must be fascinating." "It is. I get to work with some incredible authors." She paused, tilting her head. "You know, I have been curious about you, Arden. Your family talks about you like you are some kind of failure, but there is something about you that does not fit that story." I took a sip of wine to hide my discomfort. "I am just a simple guy who loves books." Megan studied me for a moment. "There is an author I have been absolutely obsessed with for years. J.D. Holloway. Have you read any of his work?" My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my face calm. "I have heard of him. His writing is extraordinary."